Special Assistant to the Prime Minister of National Security Division and Strategic Policy Planning. We were to talk about how to define national security, very elusive concept for various reasons. And the way we go about this is to essentially try and draw this bird and then go on to certain specific questions. I will be in conversation with Yusuf, and then I'll open the floor for any questions. So thank you, Moeed, for being here. Let's begin with the idea of national security. I mean, there is a dilemma. There's a lot of literature on that. Give us a sense of whether you look at it in terms of the structure or in terms of a process. Because, as you know, in international relations, there's a lot of debate on these two issues in terms of defining security. And that the jury is still out of that. So let's begin with that.
Thank you, Ejaz, and good evening, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So unfortunately, I can't tell you what I think anymore. So let me begin by telling you what the government thinks. Very simply put, if you ask me, the way I am coming at this concept is that the average citizen of Pakistan on the street needs to be secure. If you make that the core of the concept of national security, everything else will build around it. It's an inside-out view rather than an outside-in view. Comes to the same thing, because human security, economic and financial security, traditional security are all interlinked. All of us talk about the fact that the world has moved to a point where geoeconomics is much more important than geostrategy. All of us talk about the fact that the human factor is crucial. But, if you look at the vision, if you will, of the Prime Minister, one thing is clear in that, it's about the human being. Whether it's social action plans, whether it's the Ejaz program, whether it is about looking at the poor in a welfare context, I think that's the fundamental point that we're trying to make. So if you were to ask me what is the change here, the change is how you come at this concept. And if you start thinking of the person on the street and how to make them secure, you'll realize very quickly that all other aspects of security have to fit in for that to happen.
Okay, in theory, or ideally, perhaps I would agree with you. But in practice, and historically, I'm not aware of any state, barring perhaps the Scandinavian states, given their sizes, given their resources, and the rest of it. Any state that actually looks at security in those terms. The rhetoric aside, let me finish. In our particular case, there is a lot of resource constraint. Our economy for the last 4 decades at least, if not more, has been in these cycles. We are also living in a particularly bad neighborhood where traditional military security becomes paramount. But given all these factors, and I want to emphasize this point once again, rhetoric aside, good intentions aside, you have to triage. And when you begin to triage, and given the kind of, for instance, relations we have with India at the moment, given what's happening in the Great Middle East, given what's happening in Afghanistan, traditional security automatically gets the priority and gets the funding.
So I think therein lies the problem. Because you're coming at this as we've always come at this. What comes first? And the answer I want to give you is nothing comes first. All of this has to happen together or it won't happen. And, when I say this, people say, oh, this is the official view. if there's not a single person in the system who matters, civil, military included, who does not agree with this fact, that ultimately it's the average citizen of Pakistan from where we have to start. This is not what's happened always, okay? Now, where I think the way you're coming at this is misplaced is that does not change the fact that you have to have border security, you have to have the defense needs catered to as we always have. There's a neighborhood that is in trouble, more than the neighborhood is in trouble. All of that is true. But what is the ultimate objective of national security? I think we've never answered this question in a wholesome way. And that's where I'm starting from. You know, in my job, one of my responsibilities is to lead a process to create a national security policy. That's one of the tasks of the National Security Division. Fundamentally, if you get the definition right, if you get an agreement on the definition, everything flows from that. But the disagreement comes when the argument is made like you're making, but what about India, what about Afghanistan? The answer is exactly what you want, which is, you've got to look after that before anything else. But for what? To ensure that that border is safe, because you can actually then focus inward on the economy and internal security and social welfare, so that the average citizen actually is free of fear and free of want.
Look, we have
It's
no,
not written
we have no disagreement on the ultimate objective. What I am stressing is that given the resource constraint, given also, and I'm not frankly at this point stressing the very idea of the state itself, which becomes a super entity when it comes to its security. As a matter of fact, you as a political scientist,
I'm not.
well, you were a political scientist. That states, when they realize that security is scarce, would sooner settle for relative rather than absolute gain. So the state becomes bigger than the people that comprise it. And that combined with the resource constraint requires making priorities.
I mean, don't be saying this is the perfect work on what I'm telling you is absolutely not. Nobody is saying this is the perfect world, and we will get to what I'm saying tomorrow. But let me make it practical. What is the difference between what you're suggesting and the way I'm doing this? The difference is that when you start defining security the way I'm explaining it to you, military security remains paramount. There's no debate about that. Foreign policy is geared towards achieving that objective. But then you start looking at other things. Does Pakistan have a coherent, coordinated economic diplomacy strategy? We talk about geoeconomics, but geoeconomics requires an economic diplomacy strategy. Do we have one or do we not have one? The answer is in the negative. Do we have an overarching national security policy document? We don't. Do we include climate? Do we include education? Do we include population as part of national security or not? The traditional answer is no. My answer is absolutely. Because if you don't coordinate among these departments, ministries and faculties, you will again come up with a narrow definition that excludes all of this. The point is not that you're not going to focus on the paramount military security imperative. That's not the issue at all. The issue is we've been critiqued for being too narrow in our approach. And that's what we are trying to change.
Okay. So I wasn't really focusing or stressing some kind of sequential approach. I do believe that we have to have a degree of simultaneity here. But for that, for instance, I need to get some empirical evidence that this particular approach is now getting some traction in the government circles. I agree, for instance, that even in terms of traditional security, given the kind of technologies that are emerging, we need to have focus on the health and education sectors. Because with this kind of poor human resource and uncritical thinking, we will not be able to cope with those emerging technologies and therefore will not have the kind of security that we require.
I think, point taken. I can't offer you any proof because there isn't, anything visible on that. What I can tell you is that inshallah, by the end of this year, we will have a coherent national security policy that would have been made with people sitting around the table that belong to everything I've told you, like population, education, military, foreign policy, etc. And we will have a coherent economic diplomacy strategy that will begin to drive the decisions we take. This is a paradigm shift. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a cultural change needed. But you must have noticed recently there is a drive to focus on Africa. Foreign Office and the foreign policy is looking at Africa as a underutilized continent. What do you think we're doing here? We're not selling arms, we're not buying arms. What are we doing? It's classic economic diplomacy. Right? We're changing structures from within. One thing that I've realized, quite frankly, my job is strategic thinking, but firefighting takes up much of the time of the system as a whole. But I also find a weakness on the other side. I'll be very honest with you. The media, the intellectual space is also geared towards analyzing things from a firefighting mindset. Right? I'm 100% sure you're going to come to foreign policy soon and you're going to ask me why the Prime Minister didn't go to Malaysia and whatever. I'm 100% sure you're going to do that. And I'll answer when you get there. But if you ask a person like me to think about tomorrow only and give you proof day after tomorrow, I think it's a wasted resource. We've got to come at these things long term. Once we have these frameworks in place, then you can ask me for proof.
You know this, I know this, because...
He's not going to let me go, but I'm going to keep trying.
Because in your previous incarnation as a political scientist, which you are not currently, you and I were part of a process when the previous government created this National Security Division. And they were trying to create a national security policy, if you recall. Then that entire thing was wrapped up. Now you're there, and you're looking at the National Security Division, and you're also doing strategic policy planning. Are those slides still available? All the man hours that we spent trying to work that, and if it is not available, then I need to stress the point again, that we keep moving 2 steps forward and then retracing those steps. So we need to move from A to A1, A1 to B, B to B1, not the other way around.
I'll repeat. Inshallah, by the end of this year, we're going to have a coherent national security policy that will then try, under this umbrella, specific strategies for internal security, for education as it is a component of security, climate change and security, not the technical aspects of those subjects. But as a whole, where do we want to go with this concept is the answer that we're looking for. And you asked for proof. One proof is in your question. Why does the National Security Division have something called the Strategic Policy Planning Cell now? If this requirement didn't exist, or if people didn't feel that there was a void in terms of thinking long term and bringing that perspective into these kind of frameworks, why would that be there? So there's clearly an understanding, there's thinking. Now, yes, it's not going to change overnight. There is going to be resistance, there is going to be a shift that we have to make to get there. But the mindset is right. Right? Tell me, why do you think we don't have an economic diplomacy strategy in this country? We've been talking about the fact that geoeconomics has taken over for the past 20 years.
Oh, we've been talking about the fact that our geographic location is strategic.
Look, this is people like you who defense analysts who created this.
No, I did not.
Of course.
I have constantly been talking about geoeconomics.
Geostrategic
But the fact is that when Ashraf Ghani used to say, let's make Kabul a roundabout, not a cul-de-sac. Okay? What was he secretary?
I don't know, because in the roundabout you go around, never get inside. So I think it's the wrong thing to say.
That's what he said. And the idea was that the roundabout, not in Pakistan, certainly not in Lahore, throughout the world, it's the easiest way to go around something.
But Ejaz, look, seriously. You are looking at a situation where you yourself have said, look at what's happening in India. Look at the eastern border. Is that of our making? Look at what's happening between Iran and the US. Right? Afghanistan is bending over backwards to try and get to some agreement. But it's a very troubled neighborhood. Right? The point I'm making to you is that there is an effort to look at things differently, to get to coherent strategies and frameworks that can push things in terms of implementation in that direction. Look, a lot of people ask me, oh, you're going to make this policy, what's going to happen? I don't know. But the answer is, if you haven't defined what role each ministry, department, or institution has in promoting economic diplomacy, how will you ever get to implementing it? So I'll tell you my challenge right now. Economic diplomacy. What is economic diplomacy?
Well, you were supposed to somehow reach to Malaysia. You wanted an...
But what is economic diplomacy?
Trade, commerce, investment, all of that.
And you're stuck. Here's the problem. When you talk about economic diplomacy, the gut reaction is export promotion. 30 years ago, that was true. That was economic diplomacy. Today, economic diplomacy is traditional diplomacy, plus economic diplomacy, plus culture, plus tourism, plus investment, plus diaspora. If you don't have a strategy that brings all the institutions that work on these issues together, how do you actually deliver? So the first thing I'm telling you is that these things haven't happened before. This is the very first thing the Prime Minister told me when I met him after taking over was economic diplomacy strategy. Right? So there is a focus on these things. You are looking for an answer on what has happened. And what I'm trying to suggest is...
I'm looking for an answer which looks at this as a continuum. Which looks at the past, the present, and then projects into the future.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
Now, the way you have very eloquently defined economic diplomacy, at the minimum, to me, would require reconfiguring, and this is at a tactical level, reconfiguring the Pakistani missions themselves.
करेंगे ना जब strategy बनेगी तो next step is who's going to do what, whose role, what are the benchmarks for performance, how do you measure that, and then you see the results.
Okay, let's move on. So, there used to be generals in this position. Not exactly in the way this position has been constituted now, but a national security.
I thought this was going to be an easy interview, but okay.
So generals used to be there. Now you are anything but a general. So how are you going to convince all the stakeholders that what you suggested is the way forward?
I don't need any convincing.
Okay.
Somebody in the system or the system itself has been convinced and thus has taken a decision to bring a person who has no political background, no military background, and is only and only a technocrat. I didn't make this decision. Somebody has. Why? Because there is a realization in the system that what I'm explaining to you needs to be done. Does that mean that people who are operational, who sort of been practitioners for their entire life are not useful in these roles? Absolutely not. Right? I mean, there is this role, there are many other roles where a person like me may not deliver the way somebody else can deliver. But the system has made a decision at some point that we need this kind of input to go in. Right? Maybe you want to talk about what my role is and that may clarify.
Okay, for sure.
Look, this National Security Division, its responsibility primarily is policy input to the National Security Committee, which is the apex security decision-making body. Security not defined as military security, but security defined writ large. Right? The strategic policy planning part of it is a very new concept. The cell was set up 2 or 3 months ago within the NSD. I actually headed that cell for 2 months before I was fortunate enough to get this position. What is the idea? Where is the Prime Minister's think tank that provides the Prime Minister and the leadership with independent input on all aspects of security broadly defined, in addition to what the institutions are saying, whether it's the Foreign Office, Commerce Ministry, military, whatever it is. It's not a substitute. This is exactly the policy making model.
Everything that others are saying goes through you.
You're asking me too much detail, I won't go there. But the point I'm making is, anywhere in the world, you find policy making depends on multiple channels of input. Traditionally, this hasn't been the case for us. It's been very narrow. The input has been narrow. So the idea is, you look at things independently, within the system, of course, and then put that to the decision makers. And the National Security Division oversees that policy input. Right? That's fundamentally the idea. I am not the person responsible for meeting the National Security Advisor or Committee or Council of some other country. That was the operational role NSAs, the National Security Advisors, used to play. Right? I may have my share of dealing with the diplomatic side, but my job is policy input. That's what I've been trained to do. So I think there's a bit of confusion because people have sort of asked me, how are you going to do, what previously people did. That's not what I'm here for. This is a restructured job to provide input on issues that the system may not be doing in a day-to-day fashion. And the final thing that is crucial, even though, again, one gets one's share of that, the task is strategic policy thinking. The task is not what's going to happen tomorrow. Institutions do that better than anybody. They have that information, they will, input that into the mechanism every day. My task is what happens day after tomorrow. And then we link that back to today, essentially. So just keep that in mind.
So I'm assuming that you must be interacting very frequently with the Prime Minister?
With my boss.
Okay, great.
I was supposed to be here till Tuesday morning. Got a call, I have to go back tomorrow.
Excellent.
He's a hard.
I'm very happy to know that.
I'm not.
So, since you talked so much about the integration of various types of security and also economic diplomacy, tell us what happened with the Kuala Lumpur summit.
It's not been an occasion that I've been at recently when I haven't been asked this. What's your problem? What didn't you like about it?
I was just wondering, given the complexity of the situation, that on the one hand, we have decided to punch above our weight by, facilitating things between arch rivals within the Muslim Ummah. Ummah, as I said, is, again, a bird that no one has ever been able to draw for me, but nonetheless, the various fault lines. Then you've got these countries standing with us on the issue, another very important issue of Kashmir, Turkey, Malaysia, and FATF also. And then, of course, at some point when the Iranian foreign minister gets invited, the Saudis decide to read the riot act to us. And then, of course, there is the complexity of the situation with all the Pakistanis in Saudi Arabia and blah, blah, blah,
So, you'll have to give me 3 or 4 minutes to answer this. And let me begin by saying, you are looking at the person who had something to do with that. So if you want to blame me, blame me. But let me explain it to you. Why? Because there's been so much conversation about this. That the optics were bad and why this happened and riot act and whatever. Look, I'll repeat. All of us are wired to think about policies on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, we've lived in an existential crisis for years. You turn on the media, you read the newspapers, you talk to policymakers, it's all about the next 3 hours. Okay? My way of coming at this, not that I'm at all saying that I am the ultimate decision maker, of course I'm not, but we have made a conscious decision You talked about the geostrategic location of Pakistan. What has that location given us all these years? Wars, turmoil?
I would put it another. What has been made?
Good, very good. Very good. Okay, so location is only potential, right? We want to create something. The conscious decision is we are going to drive foreign policy whichever way we can to reduce the probability of external wars coming into Pakistan. We'll debate whether it's right or wrong, but please understand my logic first. Wherever we can go and intervene and help, interfere or not, the marker is how do we keep external wars out. Okay? Number two, we don't think it's in our interest to see the Muslim world divided. Okay? It is very divided, we know that. So wherever we can go and play a role, that does not mean we will be successful every time. That's the definition of mediation and negotiation. We will try. Because ultimately, in the long run, we think it's going to be very, very difficult for us to manage this environment if the Muslim world is split the way it's split. As I said. Third, whatever decision we take, ultimately we have to be cognizant of our national interest in terms of both dependence and otherwise benefit from various countries. Okay? This is the starting point. And you will find this thread in virtually every decision that's made. Okay? So now KL. Do you think that we didn't know that this is going to get caught up in this rift between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then of course Saudi Arabia and Malaysia? It is now out in public. Everybody said this, that there was a concern in Saudi Arabia that this is going to be a parallel organization to the OIC. It's going to split the Muslim world further. Right? So the conversation. The optics went wrong, apparently, as I hear, when the Prime Minister boarded a flight, went to Saudi Arabia to make an effort, and came back, ultimately decided that he will not go to Kuala Lumpur. There were two choices before us. One choice was, the optics are going to be bad, let's just not go. And say, fine, we've decided we're not going to go. The other choice was, no. Because we are looking at this strategically, and the thread that I've just put in front of you is where we are trying to go, we are going to make another effort, even if the probability is 5%. Because if we succeed, we will actually have broken an impasse, which could then lead to further improvement in these relations. So, of course we knew, when he boarded the flight, that the optics would be bad if it didn't work out. Of course we knew it was a 5% probability. So if you ask me, quite frankly, that was exactly the right decision to make, because if you've created this thread in your mind, if this is where you're going, that's the marker, then to pull back just because Ejaz is going to go on TV and bash us, I don't think would have been the right decision. Okay, wait, it's not finished. You could call this a failure if you then saw Malaysia and Turkey say, that's it, we're done with Pakistan, we don't want to deal with this, we supported them in Kashmir and FATF, and here is what's happened, and they haven't showed up. What did the Malaysian leadership say? What was the answer? Is the Prime Minister going to Malaysia next month or not? Have we been in touch with Turkey throughout or not? And when we get to February and we get to FATF and we get to Kashmir, you will see that there will not be a change in their policy. So why did we not go? We didn't go because the problem was we are the only country in the Muslim world right now who can talk to everybody. And there was a concern on both sides, whichever way we go, the balance will tilt in that direction. But then we would be partisan and it will be difficult for us to continue this conversation. Where we've ended up is you and others saying the optics are bad, there's no relationship that has been spoiled. Malaysia and Turkey we're talking to, Saudi Arabia, who, by the way, I must acknowledge, we depend a lot on is still in our camp. Iran, US happens, The foreign minister is going. Is he going to bring back something that we're going to say here's a victory? No. But the thread is the same. I'm sorry this is a long answer, but I've heard a lot about this. And with all due respect, our entire intellectual space, the analysts, the media, and the pundits, I was one of them 2 months ago, we also need to stop thinking about tomorrow and day to day and making emotive decisions. Even if I were to accept your logic that the Saudis riot act, which is not true, even if, I would say the decision is still in national interest.
Well, see, Mahathir was graceful about this. I would say even Erdogan. However, Erdogan spilled the beans on that riot act. So I think if that is
What did he say?
Well, he said that the Saudis threatened Pakistan by, sending the Pakistanis back, and
Okay.
Bangladeshis in. And
So let me ask you a question.
and the
Let
rest of
me
it.
ask you.
Hold on,
Wait.
hold
Let me
on.
ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
No, I'm here to ask you a question. I'm here to ask
Do you really think?
I think we have known each other long enough. We've worked with each other long enough for you to know that one thing that I'm never emotive about is interstate relations. As a matter of fact, as a structural realist, I possibly cannot be emotive about these relations. But what I'm saying is, and you were not there at the time that this trajectory goes back to September last year, when the Prime Minister on the sidelines of the UNGA session met with President Mahathir, and so there was this whole thing. I have a feeling that he went out on a limb without really getting his Sherpas involved to do the legwork, without reading the Saudis in. And the Saudis kept mum about it until such time that they got the red flag with reference to the Iranian foreign minister, and that's the time when they said, well, this is not going to happen.
I'll end this conversation by saying it was exactly the right decision. But let me give you one other side of this. There's a contradiction in what you're saying. He agreed to something, went out on a limb without asking the Saudis. Supposedly, we're making...
without first asking his own Sherpas about how the Saudis will react.
But that is
bringing the Saudis in.
It doesn't take much to know how somebody would react in this situation. We know the relationships in the Muslim world. The last thing I want to say on this is, be prepared. This is going to happen again. You're going to critique this again. As people are critiquing right now why the foreign minister is in Iran and then Saudi Arabia and then going to the US. Why are we wasting time? We're not wasting time. This is a low probability foreign policy approach where success is not defined by making sure that what you've gone there for will happen, i.e. the Saudis and Iranians would come together and say, okay, all good. That's not how mediation or negotiation happens. This trip is not about any mediation. It is simply for one thing, de-escalation. Whatever Pakistan, whatever little we can do, we don't have many tools, we know that. But whatever little we can do, we want to tell everybody that our goal is de-escalation and nothing else. Now, is he going to bring back anything? No. That's not the nature of the trip. Right? But, are we going to continue this thread? Yes. Are you going to see bad optics again? I bet yes. Because if the Prime Minister on the last day to another visit says, I should go and try, I'd be the first one to say go. You don't like it, that's your problem. But this is a change in the way we are approaching foreign policy, not to become part of wars, but to make sure there isn't a war that hurts us.
Okay. But here's the thing, and I agree with what you said. As a matter of fact, I think...
Finally.
The thing is that 3 weeks ago, the assessment that I wrote in the Private Times with reference to this was probably the most sympathetic towards your government.
Exactly. That's why I'm surprised you're asking me this. It was the right assessment.
No, but here's the thing. You have a certain concept of how national security policy should work, how it should be shaped. It's all very well, it's great. But this is not something that is self-contained. There are exogenous factors. There are actors outside. There are multiple actors. There are multiple fault lines. And therefore, even when you have a short to medium to long term conception of how you will play, you will still need to firefight.
Of course.
Because, a simple tweet fight from
Of course.
can throw everything around.
So we are firefighting. I mean, what is the foreign minister doing right now?
Yeah, he is firefighting.
Yeah, exactly.
So which is why I'm saying that in terms of the fact that, as you said yourself, that we're the only country that every other Muslim country can talk to, we need to begin to move, I'm assuming, to a point where we are in a position, for various reasons, where we can tell Saudi Arabia that while the Prime Minister will not attend that summit, the Foreign Minister will attend that summit. We are not there, but I'm assuming from what you're saying that we are trying to move to that point.
Look, first of all, again, I don't think there's any question that it was Pakistan's decision not to send the foreign minister. When I was involved in these conversations, right? There are good reasons for that, and I'm telling you, if you want to have a benchmark, it is what is the Turkish and Malaysian response to all of this, right? The second part of this is you keep saying I. There's no I, there's a system. I wouldn't be doing all of this if the system wasn't on board. Exactly right, we are trying to move in that direction. Exactly, it's not going to happen tomorrow. But till we get there, we need space to maneuver, to make things happen as I'm explaining to you. And the number one prerequisite for that, to our mind, is to ensure that external wars don't come inside Pakistan's borders. That is what we are trying to achieve here, so that we have that space to continue moving in the direction of economic diplomacy, of human welfare that we're talking about.
Okay. A quick question about Kashmir. I will open the floor for questions. What exactly is the policy? We've approached the foreign capitals. We have been helping the Kashmiri diaspora. We've made efforts, got the issue into the US Congress. But we still are falling short of actually getting to the point where the world realizes that while it is an issue of human rights violations, that is not the cause. The cause is the denial to the Kashmiris the right to self-determination, which is essentially an inalienable right. How long before we actually get to that?
I don't think you can define a timeline. It's a 72-year-old conflict. I think one thing I want to sort of make sure everybody understands. The movement is a Kashmiri movement, which has continued because of Kashmiris. It will continue till the Kashmiris stand up, and it won't if they don't. So the idea of how long for Pakistan to get there is a function of the Kashmir movement itself. And there, quite frankly, I will tell you that there is no let-up whatsoever. Don't mistake the absence of all-out open resistance for any change in that movement. When you've got close to 1 million forces saturating a place, there's only so much you can do. But I do not think, and you will agree, Ejaz, I do not think you've ever seen this kind of response from the West against India on Kashmir and on what is happening within India. I mean, I have, as you know, spent the last 15 years in the Washington policy scene. You couldn't say a word against India. We've got friends from Washington sitting here. Irony of ironies, I used to be called a Pakistan agent day in, day out. Why?
Or an American agent.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Neither one is paying me salary. But, the point being, why? Because it was taboo to talk about the new natural ally. Right? But that has changed, and it is changing. So, sitting here in Pakistan, the approach is diplomatic. By the way, let me also ask you, what happened to that entire story? Oh my God, Pakistan, cross-border, what's going to happen, etc. Is the world noticing that? Is the world noticing the fact that India, that put up the fence on the LOC, that Pakistan protested, has actually brought down the fence in 5 areas. India, the one that says people cross, has brought down the fence for what? To create an excuse that when something goes wrong internally, they can blame it on Pakistan. Right? So you know exactly what it is. But the reality remains, unfortunately, that the world's quote-unquote strategic interests and economic interests have trumped a lot of what the world should be doing in Kashmir. That said, I'll be honest with you, I do not find a single person in the system in Pakistan, not one person, who has even come close to saying that this is not going to work out, this is not worth it. I mean, this will continue, and there is no question about it, that within IOK, the Kashmiri movement is exactly where it was, and it will continue to strengthen given what we are seeing happen in India.
So let's open the floor for questions. I want to begin with Ejaz.
My question is very simple, Moeed sir. You said by the end of this year, you wish to have formulated what you call a coherent national security policy. Shall that policy be only coherent, or shall that national security policy will be inclusive? Because when you talk of national security policy in a security state such as Pakistan, I get lost actually. There can be definitely a national security policy which can be coherent. There can't be a national security policy which can be inclusive in a security state. Thank you so much.
One question, hold on. We'll take 3 questions and then you want to ask a question? Yeah,
Yusuf sir, it's interesting to hear about education featuring in the national security strategy. I have mixed feelings being in the education sector to hear education go from emergency to a national security issue. But I am interested to hear what kind of metrics you guys might be thinking through and what benchmarks are being discussed to keep performance on track.
Sir, you said that it is in our national interest that there is unity among the Muslim world, and you also portrayed this cancelling of Kuala Lumpur, withdrawing from the Kuala Lumpur summit is something in our long-term strategic interest. But you will agree with me that there is an urgent need within the Muslim world to respond to the many challenges, and the way to respond to those challenges is multilateralism. In the traditional multilateral model in the Muslim world, in those forums are one, they are dysfunctional, and second, they are the tools of the Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis to advance their own interests. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to push the United... Sir,
got your question.
Let me conclude. Are you going to push the Saudis that either you have to reform, and either if you don't, we are going to be part of these alternative multilateral forums? Thank you.
Okay, I've been asked to go in the reverse. So, I will not tell Saudi Arabia anything because that's their country and they will do what they want to do. We will discuss what is in Pakistan's best interest. One thing I want to tell you, because I think you probably have a strategic studies background, I'm judging by your question. This I've said in my previous incarnation, and I will say again. We are too emotive when it comes to making policy decisions. We are too emotive when we teach our students on how to approach policy. I will not go and tell anybody that if you don't do this, I'm going home. That's not how you make policy. I will very patiently look at what is in my best long-term interest, work that back, and then define a strategy for day to day on where I want to go. If that means telling somebody something they don't like, I will say it. If that means telling something that you all don't like, I will still say it. But let's not be emotive. Let's decide very patiently, based on our interest in the long run, on what we want to do. If the optics are bad, I'm sorry they're bad. This is the change that we are trying to bring in the thinking. If media doesn't like something, that's not what I've been hired for. If you think we're not strong enough and emotive enough in our response, that's not my job. My job is to look at things, and the system's job is to look at things such that 10 years from now, we look back and say, we may not have looked good on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, but we ended up where we wanted. That's fundamentally what it is. Remember one thing. In China, we talk about China today, oh my God, China this and China that. In China, for 30 years, there were conversations about whether China is punching below its weight. The Chinese model was keep quiet, work for 30 years, get your strength, then stand up to the world. Do you think that was emotively good? Do you think if there was free media there, they would have liked what was happening? Where is China today? Let's for once focus on that mark, not on what I and you want to see tomorrow. The question about education. I think you're defining national security traditionally again. I'm not saying education is going to be part of the national security strategy, i.e. military or anything. What I'm trying to suggest to everybody is security, not defined by me or the state of Pakistan, but by the world, is a very, very broad concept. It's not a negative concept, by the way. It's a positive concept. If you look at the paradigm of human security, Dr. Mahbubul Haq, our own Dr. Mahbubul Haq, what is human security? Freedom from fear and freedom from want. You walk on the street, you have your basic needs met, and you're not fearful of what comes tomorrow. This is a positive concept, it's not a negative concept. What is education going to do? If you don't educate people, if you don't give them civic sense, if you don't employ people, you will never be a secure society. That's the lens we are applying. We're not talking about a madrasa to have a gunman outside the madrasa or change the curriculum so that we can hate or love somebody. That's not the point I'm making. Please understand this. I don't want this reported in media tomorrow saying that, oh my God, everything is security now. That's not the point I'm making. I think we have to define security liberally and positively. And let me also say, Ejaz alluded to this, nobody believes this, but I'm honestly telling you, civil and military, there is no decision maker that I have come across who does not agree with the fact that this is ultimately the definition that we want to go with. I mean, very honest. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this job. I mean, that's the proof. NSP and inclusive, first of all, I'm not sure we're a security state. I mean, I think this has been talked about over and over again, and I can wear my political science hat and debate this till the cows come home. I think security states are very different characters than Pakistan does. The rowdiness of the system that you find is not a security state prototype at all. But your question about inclusivity, I take. Look, when you create these policy frameworks, there are two types of inclusivity you need. One, of content, right? You're not missing out on anything. You're not only narrowly talking about one type of security. And second, what is the input you are getting in terms of creating this policy? That work has been made easy for me because some of my predecessors had actually done exhaustive consultations with academia, with intellectuals, and with average citizens around Pakistan to get their input. So that work has been long done, and my job is now to bring this together. And you say I, it's not I again, it's the entire system. I'll just take credit for it if it's good.
एक सेकंड यहाँ से आज स्टार्ट होगा.
So thank you so much. So my question is, to achieve these ideal national security objectives, Pakistan needs to change its strategic culture first from traditional realist perspective to secularization, as said by Barry Buzil while setting national security culture. Sir, मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि to achieve these ideal national security objectives, Pakistan needs to change strategic culture first from traditional realist perspective to the secularization, as said by Barry Buzil. Do you think is it possible for Pakistan? I will second the question from sir. And if you please comment on the impacts on strategic culture due to certain moves by our neighbors, especially India, of their sophistication of their military, navy and army, and there is a certain impact on our strategic culture. Thank you so much.
This
You were talking about basically your strategy is to make sure that the wars don't spill into this country. But I'm just trying to see, try to visualize that. We have on our west Afghanistan, Iran, on our east India. You consider the situation that's happening right now in these days. Up north, it's like a roof, and south we have the Arabian Sea. So, I mean, a difficult choice between the devil and the deep blue sea sort of thing. So, I mean, how do we? It would be more about getting others to agree that they don't spill the war over, right? So, I mean, I'm trying to visualize.
Okay, got the question.
You just said that Pakistan doesn't want external wars to come into Pakistan. But as we speak, this area is under siege right now. So what Pakistan is going to do to stem the foreign money coming in for these people to hold cities hostage?
Okay, you can club these two questions. If someone, yeah, G. Either be the straight one more and then.
This is not a difficult question, but a very simple question. I believe that
Simple questions are the most difficult questions.
that President Haider had sent a car for our Prime Minister. So did we receive it, or if we didn't go, it was taken back? There is no news about that car. There was a gift of car.
Yeah, he doesn't manage Prime Minister's car pool, so he won't.
I honestly don't know. But the external wars. Look, I mean, I think when you think of policy and you make policy decisions, you always take the adversity into account. So obviously, under siege, India, Afghanistan, we know that. But the decision taken by the policymakers is that we have to try our best to make sure this doesn't spill inward. So what do we do for that, right? The debate is not that things are not really bad in the region. Of course, they're terrible in the region. Afghan peace process, right? It's a choice that Pakistan can make. How much do we want to invest in it? Do we want to go all out and try and get a resolution in Afghanistan, or do we not? When we do that, we get a lot of bad publicity in the West. Look, they're talking to the Taliban, they must be, in cahoots with the Taliban. The decision is, yes, we're going to try our level best so that there is some semblance of stability in Afghanistan, and that's one flank covered, right? Iran and Saudi Arabia, you've seen mediatory efforts, you've seen that we've tried to bring the Muslim world together. What has happened in the last 2 weeks is a wild card. I mean, that's a black swan event. I mean, nobody could have predicted it. So it's unfair to say that we are reacting. Of course we are reacting. The entire world is reacting. What are we doing? The option was sit back, see what happens, or get proactive, conduct diplomacy, and see whatever little you can do. And I accept there's very little we can do in this situation to try and see if we can placate that. Right? India is a completely different story. Where India is going is in front of everybody. We don't have control over it. For once, it's so obvious that even our worst enemies are not able to blame us for it. Usually it would be, this is all Pakistan. So it is going where it's going. What do we do there? Vigilance on the line of control, diplomatic strategy in the West to tell them where India is going and the dangers attached to it. That's what we do. And then of course China is a very different relationship, and we're trying to build that as much, even further, as fast as possible. So these are decisions that policymakers take and implement. Does that mean we'll be successful and there'll be no war in the region? No, of course not. That's not the argument. In terms of the strategic culture, I'm not sure how you define this term, but you ultimately talked about secularization and traditional religion. Not sure that's how I define strategic culture, quite frankly. Strategic culture is something very different. And what is happening in India, yes, it can affect strategic culture, because if you see the differential, if you see what is happening, if you see the troubles within India, we've now got to plan and see what that means for Pakistan. So there could be some positive changes there could be some status quo kind of decisions there. But the religion part, I'm not entirely sure how that brings up.
Where does our nuclear capability stand in national security? We do have nuclear capability.
I will start with you. Since you were not talking pretty direct, as far as the strategic thinking, you were not. Sorry to say.
That means I'm getting good at my job.
Okay. Now, as far as that strategic thinking is concerned, or strategic planning is concerned, I guess we have to understand the practicality of it as well. Provided the institutional imbalance in the country that we have, how it is possible to shift our foreign policy or that national interest, our security policy, from the security conundrum into the economic development perspective, and provided the potential that we have in our geostrategic location. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you very much, Kamran. I'm a lecturer by profession. PTI government, previously it was as a party, now as a government, has come with a rhetoric of change. There has been a lot of rhetoric of change. Like Obama did during his campaign when he was electing an election. After 8 years, we came out with the conclusion that Obama couldn't change anything, he changed himself. Same is happening with Imran Khan, I feel. As a country where we are heading, talking about the rhetoric of change, we are allowing still United Nations to intervene into our matters, and we are asking United Nations to resolve our issues.
I think you want to say United States, not United Nations.
No, I'm talking about United Nations. I mean, for resolving our issues, especially like Kashmir, we keep asking United Nations. It is a futile platform to beg in front of. For our financial issues, we keep begging IMF and something like that, World Bank. For our, we keep.
What's the question?
And where is the change, by the way? We keep allowing FATF to twist our.
We got the question. There's no change. We should.
Dr. Yusuf, you talked about an inward approach to national security, and I was just wondering, in terms of that, what have you, or what are you doing in your particular position to kind of relieve the concerns of populations or people within Pakistan? And by this I'm talking about our ethnicities who might feel that the center has ignored them for way too long and has put them on the precipice of many wars that have been fought externally, and they've paid in literally human casualties. So what are we doing to address those people and their concerns internally? That's my first question. And just one more. Okay.
Just one.
Well, I think people are asking questions, but I think I can come with a solution. And what I feel, I think we will be laughing. Interest-free economics, because like interest-free economics. Like I feel like countries who are established, they want whoever they want to make want to make them in problem. What they do is they start shaking the economy or so. What we can do is if we are not so much strengthened in our economy by just from scratch, do things ourselves. Even it's not too big. Start with that instead of getting from IMF and depending on Saudi and other countries. If we start on depending on ourselves, we can, I think, make our country proud, and it can help a lot of things.
Okay, thank you.
Lots of questions. Nuclear weapons are a critical element of our national security. They very much exist the way they do for deterrence. Pakistan's argument throughout always has been that these are the weapons of last resort, which provide us deterrence. They will continue to do that no matter what. And I think there is absolutely no question or debate anywhere in the world that I find that questions Pakistan's capability or the reliability of that deterrence. So I think that holds and will continue to hold. Although, just to shed off one of the many conspiracy theories about my role, there was a very well respected, and I don't know why respected, TV anchor who did a program saying that this division looks after all the nuclear weapons, so here I am to run away with them. First of all, you can't put them in your pocket, don't try, you'll die. Second, my division has nothing to do with nuclear weapons, it's managed completely separately. Anyways, but that gentleman remains respected and remains an anchor. Okay, question on institutional imbalance. So, let me ask you this question. I may not have spoken as directly as you wanted, but I hope I made some points that got across to you. I talked about an inclusive national security policy paradigm. I talked about economic diplomacy leading the focus going forward. To what you are alluding, why is a person like me sitting in this position and able to do what I'm telling you I'm doing? I'm speaking publicly, right?
I was talking about the practicality of it.
I'm also talking the practicality of it. If we are coming up with this framework, there's no practicality before a framework. You've got to know where you want to go before you implement it. So why is this happening? Either the imbalance that you're talking about is not what you think it is, or the entire system is on board with it. There can be only two options. You take your pick. But recognize that change is going to be slow. We are making these choices because in the long run, we're going to have answers. Right? There's no conversation in the place that I sit, or there's an election in 3 years, what do we do? No, we're looking at what happens in 15 years because ultimately, for 72 years, we've been short-term. Thus, a person like me will not be able to satisfy you on what I did in the last 3 days. But maybe 10 years from now, you can come and say, well, actually, yes, something is changing. Okay? So that's that. UN and Kashmir, sir, the reason to go to the UN is that the UN has resolutions that make Kashmir a legal dispute. That is the calling card of Kashmir that the world has seen, has recognized, and we continue to use it. Does that mean that the UN is going to come and solve this for us tomorrow and we don't know that it won't happen that way tomorrow? No, of course we know. But that is the fundamental reason Kashmir is a legally recognized dispute.
But it's been 70 years now.
Yes, it's been 70 and it may be another few years. That's exactly the point. That because UN has not been able to solve it for 70 years, we cannot just pack up and go somewhere else. How long did it take China to get Taiwan and Macau?
The situation is not the same, in fact, there.
Hong Kong and Macau.
Why not ourselves?
Okay.
What ourselves?
We have the capability.
We're not having this debate.
You may have the capability, but we've got to use it carefully in ways that will benefit us.
Exactly. We can.
And we are.
But we are not.
That's your
That's
policy.
your view, and I said, you ask your question, an answer has been given, we don't want to get into a debate.
The question about what are we doing in terms of the periphery and the center, quite frankly, there are various aspects of the state that look at that. I don't know who asked this question, but day in, day out. That's not my purview. But that is one of the key questions that we have, that we are doing, looking at in terms of what policies, what changes, if we require any, etc. But the fundamental point I made remains the same. Why, in your question, you're alluding to the fact that there is discontent because they became part of wars that took place. So I have told you that the number one goal right now for foreign policy is not to allow any wars to come in. And so the ones who hurt the most will benefit the most. But there's a lot going on in the government that I'm not privy to and is not my space. The final question came from who? Somebody asked this. I've written economy. What was the question?
He was giving a solution, so you don't have to respond to that.
You don't.
Okay. So we have run out of time. Thank you so much to Dr. Moeed for being with us.